Hi, this is Silona with the League of Technical Voters, and I'm sitting here at Las Manitas Cafe in Austin, Texas, and I'm here with Brian Behlendorf from CollabNet, and also
Apache, Mozilla, lots of different things, yeah.
Yeah, so it's very neat to be here. Yay, thanks for doing this interview with me. And what we wanted to talk about is we're going to have to be creating this open source community for doing the League of Technical Voters projects. So I wanted to get some advice on how to go about doing this properly so that, you know, we have something that works.
Well, communities are actually pretty hard to build. There was a quote, who was it, who said, people are not bricks, right?
Yes.
So if you want to build communities, go be an architect. People are different, right? You know, so the idea of building a community, actually in this case, we're talking about a community that actually already does seem to exist. The challenge here isn't going to be so much about finding individuals and trying to inspire them into, you know, this whole field of work or anything like that, but it's working with the people already here, understanding their stories, understanding what common interests they have, find a common mission, right? Something that will last for years, something that will drive a sense of identity. Identity is actually one of the biggest topics for me when thinking about how open source communities work. One of the, you know, kind of my biases has been coming from Apache, coming from Mozilla to some degree, coming from other things, building a brand, building an identity that is larger than any one participant, right? Any one funding kind of group. And we did this with Subversion as well at CollabNet, right? By giving it an independent brand, I think we're able to incent a lot of people to get involved and really invest more than just the occasional bug fix. On the premise that this is something that they have ownership in, they have a stake in, right? And the project Subversion can outlast the company CollabNet, right?
Well, what's interesting is, you know, I'm about to do two completely different kinds of communities, right? Because I've got the League of Technical Voters, which we're basically working on. There's like 5 different projects in there. It's just crazy. And with the Codathons doing the open source software for nonprofits, you know, so there's that whole piece. And then there's the grid.org, which is for me the one that's, you know, that I get paid for. It's tightly, it is tied to a company. I did notice that things seem to go better when there is some type of sponsorship.
I think what's important about having a sponsor, having a participant who is able to actually invest funds in paying for people to do things outside of, you know, I mean, everyone's got to pay rent, everyone's got to eat, right? What is critical about having a sponsor, the benefit of having a sponsor, is you get that critical mass going. You get a sense of momentum, you know, that most people don't want to volunteer for something that is going slowly, right? Something that looks like a 5-year project, right? They want to know, hey, there's this activity, there's this momentum, and if I can, you know, fix this bug, I help contribute to that, right? So that's what the full-timers are good for. And whether they're doing coding, whether they're doing documentation, whether they're doing, you know, writing the tests, you know, developers are kind of, usually they just like writing the code and test, you know, kind of an afterthought. But having that critical mass of people, and people who can fill in the missing gaps in what the community, the volunteers are willing to provide, right, is kind of totally critical, actually, to getting a project launched.
But one of the things that I thought was neat is looking at how some of the tool stuff completely does support the whole open source community aspects. And then that also leads into a lot of the stuff that I discussed with Jimmy Wales on Wikipedia. Is making sure that those tools actually do support the developers in a certain way so that they do get to focus, like you mentioned on the testing development or the iterative development. You know, when you have people coming in and doing those itty-bitty pieces and those itty-bitty changes, you know, that ends up making everything much more robust.
On any successful, well-run open source project, in my opinion at least, you have this gradient of participation, right? From people who are just users of the software to people who become expert users and want to know more, have deep questions to ask, to people who, you know, report a bug. Because actually reporting a bug is kind of hard sometimes, you know, especially for a mature product. Understanding, you know, coming up with like a reproducible situation, not just the software crashed on me, you all suck, you know, but instead, here's what causes it to crash. From there to somebody who reports a bug, but not only that, but like a patch that fixes it, or even like, here's where I think it's going wrong, right? You know, to somebody who actually says, hey, I think the behavior of this part of the software could be improved. These are all gradients of access, right? And to actually make sure that your open source community not only survives but thrives, you need to ask, how easy can we make it to get from one level to the next, right? What are the barriers that keeping people, you know, preventing that kind of movement, especially from that expert user to contributor kind of level. That comes down to the sophistication of the tools in making all of the information about the development process transparent.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things to definitely watch out for with the whole corporate sponsorship is the whole transparency aspects, because I've seen some other companies come in and they'll do the open source for some of it, but not all of it, and then that ends up causing so much conflict between the user group, and that's, and they're going, oh, you're just exploiting us, oh, you're this, oh, you're that. You know, you can't have some underlying algorithm not be transparent.
Sure. I mean, the clearest thing about kind of this managing a business around open source to figure out is that line between what you're giving away and what you're keeping to yourself. If customers are hitting a problem, they'll pay for support. They'll pay for somebody to come in and understand their issue, come up with an abstract way of defining it that doesn't reveal any private data, right? And then get it solved, get it fixed, right? So what you can keep to yourself is the expertise of the staff that you hire. You know, other companies will also build models by building other apps on top of the underlying open source pieces. In a way, that's what CollabNet did with Subversion. We have Subversion out there setting the kind of bar for how version control should happen, kind of raising the floor in a way. And then we've got other commercial tools around bug tracking and project planning and things like that form, you know, what we sell on a license basis, right, per user per month kind of basis. I think there's lots of things for companies to do to build business, as long as they're clear about, you know, even to the public, what's the bits that we're going to, you know, work with the community on, and then what are the bits that we're going to go sell as an enterprise edition, you know, to the customers.
Because the reality of grid computing is that it is completely, you know, every single implementation of it is just like so different. Do you know what I mean? It's like the whole Human Genome Project, the SETI project, all the different computer, all the different science applications, all the different mathematical applications, that every single time you do an implementation, you need that paid support, you know, for the most part. You know, I mean, someone's going to have to pay for that implementation because it's grid computing, it's expensive, it's big. I think it would create a huge conversation about what is open source and what should be open source and all those different things with using an example like that.
One thing you could ask, or you could propose, is that the organization have a policy of saying what is built is built as open source unless there's a justification for it to be private, which is a different mentality, a whole different framing than we're going to, you know, keep things to ourselves and then only decide to open source things if we justify it. In your case, for example, if there was a group of companies in the genetic space who were actively building open source components, it would be a bad idea to build a proprietary thing to service that group that, you know, ended up competing against what was being built for free. I've seen companies manage this very poorly, where they put out open source code that basically doesn't work, you know, as kind of a checkbox, you know, to get the PR benefit of, hey, we're open source, yeah, it doesn't do much, but, you know, hey, if you fill in the missing pieces, it might work, right? And instead, they keep those missing pieces themselves as proprietary code, and that just, I mean, that's worse than doing nothing. There's this kind of ego-driven kind of development culture that, you know, still permeates a lot of Silicon Valley, still permeates a lot of technology.
Google still has it.
Right. The whole "don't be evil" thing, that's the best thing about that phrase, is that it does kind of institutionalize a little bit of humility. Right. But this being humble thing is what makes any open source project work. If you can make the case to them that, hey, if we can build an architecture, a framework, that these researchers, as they're building their advanced algorithms, as they're pushing the envelope, they're building that on top of our code, right? Or on top of a common body of code, right? The feedback loop from research to production will be that much tighter, right? You know, and the appeal to the academics would be, well, your ideas are going to be put into practice much sooner.
I guess then I want to wrap it up by just talking about accreditation, giving credit for different people in regards to the work that they do. Other ways of doing accreditation, like having that built into the tool, and anything else.
So it's actually an interesting topic, right? Because credit is easy to give. It's something that developers clearly appreciate having, right? And by virtue of a lot of these projects being transparent, you know, seeing who made commits, who made what comment on the mailing list, who made, you know, everybody's activity is if it's archived right, if it's searchable right, that activity becomes part of their record, right? Part of the credit that they can get. When you're an enterprise trying to establish your credential, a company in this space trying to establish a credential as like, you should come to us for support, being able to say our teams are working on this code. Look, that's their names. There are engineers. They're posting from CollabNet addresses, right? We might have a bit of clue about this. That's a big deal too. So that's another reason for that to be something easily given. But you have to weigh that against, is it ever going to disincent other participation? And finally, roles like yours are absolutely critical in helping people get from that, I'm an expert user, I'm thinking about maybe getting a bit more involved. Who are the people I should talk to, get to know, but also what are the projects or parts of the project that I feel like I can approach most easily? So all that said, yeah, you've got the right idea. And let's give developers as much credit as we can, and let's really highlight the good work that's being done.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate you taking the time and doing the whole let's be official thing and breakfast at Las Manitas. Yep. And thank you. Yay. Awesome. Thanks. Thank you.